Hello and welcome to What Lingers, the podcast where we uncover the questions behind people's stories. I'm Cristian Figueroa.
And I'm Liz Melchor, and we are the team behind Storytelling Lisboa, where once a month, 10 storytellers get on stage in front of 200 people and tell true and personal stories related to a theme.
It is always a great event, but there is a catch. We always have lingering questions for the storytellers and no format to ask them. Until now.
In this second season of What Lingers, we invite storytellers to revisit and listen back to their original story from that night, and then sit down with us for a conversation to uncover what lingers for us all.
Just a heads up, the recording of the story you will hear comes from the actual stage of Storytelling Lisboa, so the sound might be a little bit fuzzy.
We're back! Cristian, we're back!
Yes! I miss you guys so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I miss you too.
Season 2, we are online. We are far away because I'm away in Latin America and you guys are in Europe. But it doesn't matter. We're here showing up every week to bring you What Lingers.
We're starting the season with a very appropriate theme. It's called endings. We're beginning with endings. It sounds like a theme that would be really dark and depressing. And when I tell you that the story is going to involve a lot of dead bodies, I think you'll also probably imagine it's going to be dark and depressing. But
the storyteller for this episode makes everything softer and a little bit funnier. Let's hear the story told by John Hooker.
I was about 25 when I landed my first serious job in my hometown back in the 1970s with a tour operator. And they were called Saga, and they specialised in taking the over 60s on winter breaks. And an over 60 then is probably an over 80 today. And the proposition was quite simple. We'll take you to Mediterranean hotels out of season, and the cost will be what it would cost you to stay at home. Now, what they didn't say was that the cost of staying at home in a nice warm house was going to be very different to staying in a Mediterranean hotel, which actually is good for keeping the cold in. And therefore, you'll be staying in a fridge. And old people and cold is not a good combination. We took about 125,000 people a year on holiday, and inevitably, some of them didn't come back. And some of them came back as cargo. And my job was to deal with all the hospitalizations and deaths, the ultimate ending. Now, the insurance covered you to be buried or cremated in the destination, but if you wanted Auntie Mary to come home, repatriated, there was a cost. And my goodness, didn't it focus the mind? When I'd be talking to the next of kin, explaining the options, we had to have Auntie Mary home. She was an integral part of the family. Oh, she just would love to be here. Well, that's going to cost you X. And there'd be a pregnant pause. You know, she always wanted to go to Sorrento. This is where she would love to be buried. Well, the problem with that is, number one, that she's in no position to be asked because she's dead. And secondly, it was probably picked out of a brochure with a price promotion. So you can imagine the death certificate, cause of death, price promotion. And it really brought the worst out in people. There was one particular couple in Yugoslavia, today it's Croatia, and he had died of a heart attack, and I was explaining to the wife the options. And her response was quite extraordinary. And it went something like this: "At last I'm rid of the bastard. He can be buried here." And you could tell by the tone of her voice that she was never ever going to buy a return air ticket to Croatia, ever. She was going to save on a UK funeral, and more importantly, she wouldn't have to invite all his side of the family round for tea and sandwiches afterwards. But you have to be careful where you die. And I was on the TSS Atlas. It was a Greek-registered cruise ship that was originally built as a freighter. And back in those days, you didn't build freighters with an in-ship morgue. Guy dies at sea. We're doing a winter Canary Island cruise. And the captain was one of these really superstitious ancient mariners who thought that Moby Dick would swallow him. And there was no way was he going to have a body in the fridge all the way back to Southampton. In any event, where were they going to put all the feta cheese? And so, after a lot of discussion, it was decided that he would be buried at sea. The captain had persuaded the wife. And it would be done as everybody was going in for breakfast, because they would all be piling into the buffet and not peering out of the porthole. The ceremony took place at sea level. There's special doors for loading and unloading in dock. And it was quite a nice ceremony. The captain said a few words. We had the body bag and we gently put it into the North Atlantic. The ship was slowly moving, so the distance was growing. It was really quite poignant, until we realised that the body bag wasn't going to sink because it didn't have enough ballast. Now, you can't, have you tried turning around a 16,000-ton cruise ship? Do it too quickly and you'll have the buffet piling into the passengers. And what seemed like an eternity became 360 degrees, retrieved the bag, put in some extra ballast. The engineers had sent up some spare gear wheels from the engine room and dispatched him, and he sank like a stone. Boom. But if you die in no man's land, you're going to give me a right headache, as I discovered. Now, these are the days when people weren't worldly travelled. And I want you to imagine a plane coming into land at Alicante in Spain. And when they put the seatbelt signs on, all these saga people, they stand up. They start putting on their hats, their coats, they're getting the duty-free bags. They were big spenders on duty-free, mainly brandy, medicinal purposes, you understand. And there'd be this terrible odour of camphor, because they're all wearing their best gear, so they had mothballs in all the pockets. Planes landed, they brought up the steps. Not many airports had the arms to the terminal in those days. And there he is. It's him, the wife, and the sister or the sister-in-law. I can't remember which now, but there were three of them. He's carrying the duty-free bags, because that was the man's job in those days. Gets to the top of the stairs, drops down dead. Now, this is a right kerfuffle. Everybody who's still on the plane's got to go out through the rear stairs, and you know what the British are like. They don't like to complain, but they do like to tut. We could hardly put our arm round him, drag him up to immigration and say, "Oi, Paco, can you stamp the passport? He's still warm." The Spanish weren't keen on having him coming in. They said, "No, he's on the plane. Let him go back." Well, that couldn't happen for two reasons. One, the plane was full. And secondly, whilst you may have a life vest in the seat in front of you and an oxygen mask in the overhead compartment, you sure as hell don't have a metal-lined coffin in the hold just in case. So he got taken to the aircraft hangar because this was still airside. God, if he'd only made it to the baggage reclaim, there'd have been porters and bloody trolleys. A real kerfuffle went on for about a day. And eventually, I think we got a carnet issued and he was considered import-export. That seemed to be the way to do it. And he came home because the wife paid. But don't think that the problem is over then. We work with an international undertaker in Croydon in South London, Rowland Brothers. And when you rang them, they oozed sympathy. "Oh, Rowland Brothers, international undertakers, how can we help you?" "Hello, Tony, it's John here from Saga." "Oh, hello, mate, how are you?" Because he was really a cockney. And he was telling me one day of a flu epidemic, which was really good business for them. He got his mother-in-law in sanding down the boxes because they made their own coffins, and the window cleaner was pallbearing because he could carry ladders and had a transferable skill. And he rang me to say his man in the van had gone to Gatwick Airport to pick up the box, the coffin. The Co-op had got there first, big national chain, taken the wrong one. So instead of going to London for cremation, it was on its way to Brighton for a burial in some picturesque cemetery on the South Downs with lovely views over the English Channel. Man in the van is going down the A23, no motorways, no mobile phones back in the 70s. They managed to swap the boxes, but it does make you wonder. When you're next sitting in the church or the crematorium or the chapel or wherever, is this really your Auntie Mary that you're thinking about, or is it somebody else's Uncle Frank? Because you'll never know. And I'll leave you with this. Having had many years of dealing with this, I'll tell you one thing. There's only one good thing about the day you die. The ultimate ending. It'll be somebody else's problem. It ain't going to be mine. Thank you very much.
Oh my god, yay! Thank you so much. That was so amazing to see it again. We watched this story on stage in 2022.
Yeah.
The theme was endings, and as you said it, this was the ultimate ending. So yeah, thank you, John, for being here with us. We'll start with the introduction for the audience who doesn't know you. We know you from the stage, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born in the UK and I started life training to be a school teacher in geography, art and ceramics. I went to teachers training college and I realized it wasn't for me because, to be a good teacher, you've got to have experience of life. And so I came back home and did a lot of dead-end jobs. And eventually I saw this advert for management trainee in a tour operator. And that was the start of 40 years of being in the travel events industry, running around the world. And I remember the first Christmas, they said to me, "What do you do at Christmas?" And I said, "Well, family. How would you like to go overseas?" This is where people didn't travel very often. The closest I ever got was standing on the Lees in my hometown, seeing France on a clear day. And they sent me to a place called Castel Stari, which was in Yugoslavia, in the days when Tito was still alive. Now, this is back in 1976. And I ended up taking a group of 60 pensioners. Now, a pensioner then, an over 60, today would be an over 80. And I think what was interesting back then was you were dealing with an audience that had gone through the Second World War. And therefore, there was this sense of camaraderie. There wasn't any mobile phones. There was no technology. So there was a great amount of patience. The bus will come. It wasn't, "It's late, where is it? I've got to look on an app."
Yeah, it was like a totally different generation.
A very different dynamic, and also quite a lot of widows, because obviously husbands had been lost in the war. So it was a very matriarchal type society. And some of these women, my God, they were tough. They were absolutely tough as bones. And they taught me so much. I was just really excited that I could go over the English Channel and explore the world. And I had great admiration for these people because of what they'd been through. So I didn't feel at all intimidated. And I think they taught me one thing which I've never sort of forgotten, which is nothing surprises me. Because in life, everybody's got a story. You might only want to hear the story once, but everybody has got a story. And if you listen, you learn. And that's how it was. And I would have them. One of the things that they taught me was how to ballroom dance, a bit like Strictly Dancing. They taught me how to tango. They taught me card games because that's what you did. You didn't have the technology. You didn't have gaming or anything like that. And so you were there, the youngest person in the room. You were sort of in charge, but basically they were nursemaiding you.
So what was your title, your actual title in the beginning?
I was just an operations executive at the time.
When you started, did you think that sort of death logistics was going to be part of the game? Or when did you realize that?
When the first one died.
And who was the first one? Do you remember?
I don't remember who the first one was, but I do remember on one occasion, and I'm down in Figueroa, which they could never say. They used to call it finger in your ear hole. And it was a hotel that was U-shaped, and there was a swimming pool in the middle. And it was about half an hour before lunch, and there were loads of people sitting out on the balconies, all sitting there knitting away, or they're reading a book, because that's what they did back then. And suddenly this guy, it was ironic, unfortunately, it was on his birthday, and he dived into the swimming pool and had a heart attack. I remember being in the reception and they said, wait, you better come out. And I went out there, and the scene was like something out of a film set. There's lots of people looking over the balcony. There's a kerfuffle going on. It's disorganized chaos. And so you got the resort staff arguing with the ambulance driver because he hasn't been paid from the previous trip. Then you got the bodies on the side. Then suddenly it was lunch was served. So suddenly all these people disappeared because they're all going to go and have their lunch. We put the body on a sunbed, and we had 4 porters, and they weren't very tall people in that part in Andalusia. So we carried the sunbed into the hotel because it was lunchtime. We couldn't take it through reception because they were all going in to have lunch, and you didn't want to put them off their chicken and chips. And so we took it to the kitchen, left it there for half an hour, and then there was a service lift. And honestly, we're trying to get this sunbed into the service lift, almost vertical.
It's like out of like a British comedy, right?
It was a complete farce. And, we British, we're known for our black sense of humor. And in situations like that, you have to see the funny side of life. Otherwise, it just screws you up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of a segue because that's the thing. You talk about all these deaths, and so you don't really know how many you had to manage. I mean, is it like 5 or is it like...
I guess for the time I was there, probably about a dozen.
Wow. Okay, that's really a significant amount of people. And you tell that story and it's so funny to listen. And then like even this little story is so funny and I can totally envision it just like these British sitcom kind of comedy sketches. And I'm wondering though, were you also having grief feelings and the sadness, or was this something that was really hard in any way?
Well, on this one, I can tell you it was very hard because I then had to ring the daughter and tell her father had died on his birthday.
Oh, yeah, that sounds intense.
I'm 25 years old.
No one prepared you, and no one gave you like a proper training as psychologist, like as you would have it probably today. And this,
yeah, and so you just did it because somebody had to do it, and you did it with all the sympathy and the clarity and the empathy that would come to you.
And John, I'm really curious to know about how do you think this impact your life? Because I mean, you were very young, dealing with really heavy stuff, emotional stuff, and not only even the logistical you share on your story was really complex, but I mean, it seems to me like people are having holidays and they don't want to ruin their holidays with someone dying. So it's like, okay, someone died on the pool, I'm gonna just have my breakfast. And I don't know, all these things were happening, or like this, what you share in your story about putting the body into the ocean and let's do it while breakfast so nobody will see it. How do you think this all experiences impact your personal life and your relationship with death?
I think it did shape me. And I think what it made me was very self-sufficient. And I think working with an audience like that, it gave you a foundation of patience. And I think what has resulted in is having been an event organizer in the broadest sense for so long, what kicks in is the organizational side of a death. So when my mother passed away, and at the time I was living in Rio de Janeiro, and I was constantly going back because she was suffering from cancer. Instead of being 3 months, she went on for 13 months. I remember getting the phone call when she'd have passed away, and I knew I was going to lose her. So the grieving had been done, and I just went straight into organizational mode, because that's what I knew how to do best, was to organize, and probably it's resulted in me being much more of a giver than a taker. because I was always there to help people. I was always there to take away the pressure. And I think there was nobody ever saying, well, how do you feel? What's this doing to you? And for too long, it was me. People were looking at me to be the solver of all their problems. Even if they had a hangover, well, what are you going to do about it? And I think the empathy and the grieving, it's easier if you don't know the person because you can cut yourself off. And if it's someone who's close to you, then depending on the circumstances, I think I tend to sort of grieve internally. I'm not one who's going to make a big drama.
Yeah.
I'll pay my respects and I'd be thinking about them. And I think everybody does it differently. But as you get older, it surrounds you far more. And therefore you become much more resilient to what is inevitably going to happen to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing. It's that death happens to everybody. And I definitely feel like we live in a society that ignores that completely. I'm sort of on that train too. You kind of pretend, oh, that happens to other people, even though we all know it's our inevitable end. But that's the other interesting thing about your story is that you talk about the logistics, because that's something also people don't think about. And it ends up being like a huge thing, like having to bury the body. Oh my gosh, the burying of the body at sea, which the fact that you guys buried the body at sea and then the body didn't sink, like that's just unbelievable. Like that's just like it's like the most unbelievable thing, but it's like reality, right?
We'll go back to the days of the conquistadors when they were sailing off to South America.
Oh, so many people died.
They got buried at sea.
Yeah, and we have rituals, like actual indigenous rituals do it in water, and that's very common. But speaking about that specifically, I was really wondering, when someone dies on a cruise, is there a doctor in the boat saying like this actual person dies from a natural death, or I don't know, something happened, there's an investigation, you can sign the documents? Because it seems like easy, just die and put a body in the ocean. And it's like, what's the behind that, like the paperwork? Who's doing that? Are you doing that?
The doctor would sign a death certificate. Yeah, so you'd have to get the doctor involved. They would sign the death certificate and therefore the body could be released. What was always interesting, talking to the undertaker we worked with, what the most requested thing back then was from the next of kin? The one item they asked about the most.
What is it?
A camera. Because the camera would have had the photographs, the last photographs of auntie or uncle or whoever. And that was what they wanted. And I remember him giving a presentation one day and he said, listen, if you find a body on the beach, I don't expect you to go trying to find the camera, but understand it's the most requested item back then. Today it wouldn't be, because everyone's got phones there sending messages and images and it's much more intimate. But back then, this is what was important. I remember one person, he himself was a doctor, and what he requested when his mother died overseas was a copy of the printout of when they tested her heart. Yeah. And because that meant something to him. He wanted that last piece where I guess it's doing this and then becomes a line.
That's lovely. And I was thinking, because while you would share your story also, you mentioned something that brings the worst in people. When you die abroad, that can bring out the worst in people. And you bring the example of the woman being kind of relieved of the person, her partner dying. But do you have like a specifics or a memory that it was probably not bringing the worst of people, but like a beautiful out of silver lining of dying abroad?
Well, that's a really good question, because I think I was dealing with an era where I think back then death was much more matter of fact. There wasn't the sophistication attached to it. I think the problem today, there's too much noise, too much news, too many platforms. It's all instant. It's all about, I need to know everything now. I mean, back then you'd be sending letters. I wouldn't say there was ever a pleasant situation, but there was probably practical situations. And one of them was on a Italian coach tour holiday, which went from Rome and went up to Venice and went via Florence. And they'd all got on in Florence. And one of the ladies had passed away sitting on the bus. And so there were two options. You get everybody off the bus, and that's going to cause a real problem with the schedule. And they've got lunch booked at the hotel in Rome. This is the black humor coming out. And so it was decided to leave her on the bus sitting next to her friend. And her friend said, no, she can come with me. She's fine. She's asleep. So she was asleep for the next 2.5, 3 hours, however long it took to go down. Oh, and all we did was we emptied the coach. They were desperate for lunch anyway, so they all disappeared and took the bus round the corner and then removed the lady who was in her coat, and her friend was sitting next to her. And of course, back then, you could do that. Today, you'd have to have an inquisition. Yeah.
Did you have to deal with tears? Because it almost sounds like everybody's sort of stoic. Did you have to deal with an excessive amount of emotion ever?
No, you never really had too much emotion. But I'll give you an example of how it all changed, because I was in Brazil for the World Cup and the Olympics. And during the Olympics, we've got a lunch going on in one of the restaurants, and we had about 70 people there. And one of the guests had a massive heart attack and died at the lunch table. And we had to obviously stop lunch and take everybody out. And there was a number of them were really put out. I haven't finished my lunch. He's just died of a heart attack. Oh, yeah, but I haven't finished my lunch. That would never have happened all those years ago. And so, if you like, the selfishness in some ways has now come into the, I retired out of the events industry. And I think probably the thing that appealed to me most when I went into it were people. And the one thing that drove me out of it were the people. Because what is it with an intelligent person that once they're all in an organized program, they switch off? And it was always my problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to manage. To manage humans and to manage humans in a group is a big ask.
Yeah, and of course, today you have to be careful what you say. Some cultures are very much about, I'm going to sue you. Some of them go out of their way to have an injury so that they can make a claim. Back then, it was, my friend is dead, leave her on the bus, we'll go and have lunch in Rome. It wouldn't get away with that now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you've seen it from the inside, right? You've been working with these people and you've been working from decades and 4 decades at least. You've seen probably the change, and now you're living in Lisbon and also seeing all the changes in the city. And yeah, humanity is just going in a funny place, I guess.
And how old are you now, John? And
I'm 3 years younger than Piers Brosnan.
How old is Piers?
And he's 73. I'm 70 years old.
Okay, so you're 70 years old. So you're basically like 10 years older than the people that you used to guide and organize. And so what is it like to now arrive at that age?
Well, I think they're the 80-year-olds. So my view is I've got another 10 years before I arrive and bang on that door. It's probably why I don't particularly enjoy socializing with people with my age, because all they ever talk about is illness. Why is it when you're young, you have a left knee and a right knee, and when you get older, you got a good knee and a bad knee? I just refuse. I mean, age is but a number. As you get older, all you can do is put your house in order. There's an old saying that be nice to your kids because they choose your nursing home. And I would add to that, be nice to your kids because they're the ones who are going to empty the attic. So guess what? I've emptied the attic. I've done all the paperwork. And so I can now enjoy life. And there is a little folder that my 2 sons will access, and it's all done for them.
So you managed all the logistics. Basically, what you say at the very end of your story is that the best thing about dying is that nobody has to deal with like the logistics, essentially. But you pre-did it.
Well, I've certainly minimized it. And I basically said to them, the will is the will. And it depends where I die, whether I die here or whether I die in the UK. But the day I die, it is somebody else's problem. And in this case, it's going to be their problem. And I've just made it easy for them by not leaving them with, what the hell do I do?
Yeah. And speaking about kids and your kids, because you brought one of your sons to storytelling in Lisbon and we met him. How this lifestyle of traveling, well, no faxes, no phones, no Tinder dates, impacted your personal life? Like, where do you, how, if you mind sharing, where do you met your partner, or these kids were born in the UK? I'm curious if it was a cruise love story, because you travel a lot. You've been around a lot as well, I guess.
I've been around the block a few times.
Yeah, I can
Ooh,
imagine.
that could be another episode.
Not in that sense. I've only been married once, and I married somebody who was in the industry. And I think a whole number of factors that got in the way in the end. But one of them was too much traveling. It was all very amicable. I mean, obviously there were stresses, and nothing's ever easy. The thing is, when you separate and you get to a divorce situation, the first 95%'s dead easy. The last 5% is extremely difficult and painful. I think the easy bit is, well, who's going to have that painting? Who's going to have the sofa? Who's going to have the house?
The physical stuff, not the emotional part of it.
Yeah, the emotional part is what's always more difficult.
It's interesting that you put the emotional part in the 5%, because in my perspective, I would put it in the 95%. That's why I was confused.
Well, I use that. I mean, the point I'm making is that there is one part which is very logistical. And the point is, don't spend too much time arguing over a bloody vase, when really it's about how are you going to emotionally adjust. And I think a lot depends on your upbringing. I was brought up in a household where there was no emotions, because both of my parents were incapable of showing emotion, because they both came from broken homes. And so it was a very different set of circumstances. My father never hugged me. My mother never kissed me. I used to kiss my mum when I used to see her. I'm completely the opposite with my two sons. They get hugs and kisses, and their mates get a hug as well. I'm very huggable.
That's lovely.
But only because as a child I didn't have it.
But I mean, I guess we're talking about when logistics and emotions combine, right? And that logistics are these, like the whole conversation, I mean, divorce or death or any of it, it's like the logistics are something that, well, they're accomplishable, right? They might be tricky, but you can figure them out. You can do them. You can feel like you've done something. And then the emotional part's always messier.
I think one of the things which I have great admiration for, and I see a lot of this at storytelling, and particularly with the audience, because the younger generation are much more open to showing their emotions. And depending on the theme of the story, depends whether you're going to have a load of storytellers who are on the couch doing a therapy session, or whether you're going to have something different. And young people are much more about this. My generation was the opposite. You didn't really show it, stiff upper lip and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure back in those days, there were a lot of unhappy marriages, but of course, divorce wasn't an option.
Interesting.
And so time changes and things change, and I don't believe in looking back. I think you've got to keep looking forward, and you've got to take your opportunities when you can. And sometimes you have to create your own luck. And life goes like this now. It doesn't do this.
Yeah, zigzags instead of a straight line.
And I think this is why I enjoy doing storytelling, because it's really observational. And if you listen to the stories, it's always a little thing that I've observed that suddenly becomes a story. And there's a story in everybody in that sense. And I think maybe that's how I show my emotions, comes back to giving. If somebody smiles and I've made them laugh, I feel I've achieved something.
Aww.
And I think that's how it is, I think. I mean, I'm sure my parents were very proud of my achievements, but it would have helped if they told you. I mean, the other expression, grin and bear it. You just got on with it. And I think that was part of what I did. Just get on with it. Have a go.
Yeah, I think we all can relate with that a little bit in families. I think That's the way we are thought as society, as the human complex that we have now. Emotions are just starting to get prioritization in mental health discussions and everything. But really interested in taking a little step back to the storytelling part, because you've been on our stage several times and you have a very specific way of sharing your stories. The way you share your stories is always with this British wit, as we say, and like a little bit of humor, and maybe not letting your emotions slip away through your stories. Is this something that you do intentionally, or is this just the way you are normally in daily? This is John everywhere, or this is John on stage? Do you think it's a difference between the John who's a dad, John who's a person in Lisbon, and John who's a person telling a story on stage?
I am three different people. And in many ways, I'm quite a private person in that sense. So my objective when I'm telling a story is to engage with people. And if somebody comes up and says, hey, I can relate to that, or I enjoyed that, or it made me smile, job done. As a father, I'm clearly a very different sort of person. And I have two sons who are very different. And the way I interact with them is slightly different because they're different characters, but the overall is the same. And as a private person, probably only my closest friends know how I really am as a person. And I keep the three separate. Otherwise, there's no mystique. There's no mystique. You can have a bit of mystique in life, you know? The great thing about being in the events industry is we're fantastic at speed dating, because I spent all my life meeting strangers. And consequently, you always have to take the lead, because you've got to sort of find a level, got a way of communicate. That's how the humor comes into it, because that can be a great leveler. And you don't have time to talk about yourself because you're too busy trying to understand them. And so when it comes to me, the real John, then you'd have to ask those who are closest to me what I'm like as a person, because it's not what you see on the stage. Some of it's what you see on the stage. Yeah. I am quite a humorous individual naturally, and I do see the funny side of life because you have to. But I'm not one who will spend hours and hours angsting about how I might feel about something.
Whereas like I have been that person that spends hours and hours angsting.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are things that stress me, and I do suffer occasionally from stress, and we all have that. But I just don't go out and talk about it because I actually don't think it's going to assist me necessarily. And why do I want to tell a load of nosy people just, fine. It's a different generation.
This popped into my head as you were talking to all the people over the years when you were the tour organizer. Did it ever get lonely to be that person that was always sort of organizing other people and asking about them and not getting asked about yourself?
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why I got to the point where I was doing an event, and it's very intense for 4 or 5 days, wherever you are in a foreign country. So you're with the suppliers, you're with the delegates, you're with the client. It's very long days. You're the last one to bed, the first one up. And then you get home, and for the first night, you want to shut the world out. I just want to do nothing, switch off, and probably have beans on toast, because I've been eating in fancy hotels and restaurants for the last week. And then after a couple of days, you think, well, what I'm going to do? Because your friends weren't going to wait for you to come back. I was very, very conscious of not sounding blasé. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't make next week because I'm in New York, or then I've got to go to Bangkok. So I actually played it right down. I never really talked about it, and I couldn't expect them to put their life on hold or them to accommodate me. And so in answer to your question, yes, it can be a very lonely life. And there are a lot of professionals out there that are still single because they're wedded to the job, and they're wedded to that sense of being needed, because you're in an environment with people and you're needed because you're organizing it all.
But I just think that it can be lonely, but that's sort of the thing that you get is that you're needed. And then also I just have this image from when you were talking at the beginning you're kind of like the center of the room, right? You're the popular one in a certain way, but it never goes past a certain point because you see these people for what, a week, and then you never see them again, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you never see them again. Or there was one account I dealt with in a later life for 14 years. I did product launches and incentives and conferences. So I knew them all when, in fact, when it came to the database, I could tell the client company more about their dealers and the dealers' partners than they had, because it was still a professional relationship.
Yeah, it never trespasses the boundary of the relationship. And speaking a little bit of that, then, now that we're back a little bit in the personal side of when you were mentioning about being the one who gives all the time, and you were brought up in this company as being the giver, the giver, the giver. How's your relationship with receiving now? Or have you had the chance to switch or open to receive, which is something that we all have difficulties, I think, as humans, to give, but also to receive compliments, gifts, whatever it is. Have you had the chance to be taken care of or to receive back?
I'm not very good at receiving gifts because I sometimes, not that I feel uncomfortable, it just doesn't sit well. And in fact, on the story I told on Wednesday in the Portuguese session, I had a guy came up to me, shook me by the hand, and he said, I was in tears because you told a story in Portuguese. And even our government is now moving towards English. And he said, you got up there and you did it. And he said, I was overwhelmed by the fact that you're not even Portuguese and you did this. And I'm thinking, hang on. Why are you crying? I mean, I just told a story. But what I have to recognize is it meant something to him, and I created this, and therefore he was paying me a huge compliment. And that's the bit I'm not quick to adjust to, because I've been so busy in the events industry, on to the next one, give. And occasionally, I can't even go into a restaurant and have a quiet dinner with friends without thinking that service is a bit late or that plate isn't in the right place. If I go to the theater, I'm more interested about how's it all happening behind the scenes as opposed to what they're saying. You know, I need to switch off and just enjoy the moment.
It can take practice, being in the moment. It's hard. But also, good job. I just want to say, John's Portuguese is not perfect, shall we say.
Quite right.
As mine. And you got up on stage this week for the very first time and you told a story that was, I think, 10 minutes or however long it was, near there, all in Portuguese. I think that is awesome for everybody. And obviously it really touched some people. So thank you for doing that. I just appreciate that. And also I think now might be a good time to sort of wrap things up. And we have a final question that we've asked people. And that is, how has it felt to revisit your story today?
I think it's interesting because I think it's on two levels. When you revisit a story, there's always the logistical side. I could have said that better, or I went there. So you beat yourself up. But the other side of it is the audience haven't got a clue what you're going to say. That's what I love about storytelling. The expectation is, I don't know, I'm curious. My biggest takeaway from telling stories is having the ability to think of ideas that can formulate into a story that you can tell on the stage and people relate to it. And people come up and say, I get that because I've had the same situation. And I think it's a story I've told not on the stage a number of times, and it still resonates well and it still makes people laugh. And what we're talking about, death. So if you can laugh at death, I think it might put you in a better place when it eventually comes along and says, hello, I'm here, jump in the trolley. I think you're never too old to learn new tricks. You're never too old to get up there and have a go. Don't give up before the ultimate ending will come along, because when that comes along, it's going to bang on the door. You've got no choice. It's going to happen. So in the meantime, keep learning, keep doing things. And if the audience always claps, and I have people come up to me saying, I heard that one, and you think, okay, I'm doing something.
That's it for this episode of What Lingers.
Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And also follow us on Instagram at Storytelling Lisbon to keep up to date.
What Lingers is a podcast from the team behind Storytelling Lisboa and is produced by Jonny Bunyan. He's amazing.
Thank you so much for listening, and join us again for another edition of What Lingers.
See you next week.